All right, everyone at attention. All right, good evening and welcome to the February 24th, 2025 meeting of the City of Summit Planning Board. My name is Stephen Spur and I have the privilege of serving as chairman of Summit's Planning Board. If you'll please rise, we'll begin first with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Bear with me as we go through some technicalities here. In accordance with New Jersey Statute 10:4-10, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to the newspapers of record and has been posted here in City Hall. For the benefit of the interested public, this meeting is being live streamed to the city's YouTube page and also broadcast on Summit's government channel, which is Comcast Channel 34 and Verizon Channel 30. Any hearings on applications for development in this meeting are quasi-judicial proceedings. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues that are relevant to what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and decorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. Please note that fire exits are to my right, your left, and at the back of the room where you entered. The city has a listening system to assist the hearing impaired. If anyone needs hearing assistance, please obtain the necessary equipment here at the dais and return it immediately after our meeting. I will ask Ms. Cotiga, who we'll soon introduce as our board secretary. Will you please call the roll of the members?
Ms. Balson-Alvarez.
Not present, but expected.
Ms. Bowen.
Yes.
Mr. Dalmasso.
Here.
Mayor Fagan.
Here.
Mr. Felmet.
Here.
Mr. Formicelli.
Here.
Councilmember Hamlet.
Here.
Mr. LaJoy. Mr. Sala. Mr. Stern.
Here.
Chairman Spur.
Here. All right. Well, the quorum, so we may proceed. I'll introduce first Steve Warner as the planning board's attorney. Mr. Warner will advise board members on matters of law and serve as a key interface with the applicant's attorney. Mr. Warner will not vote on the applications or other matters formally considered by this board. Nicole Cotiga, as I already briefly introduced, is a city employee and will soon be appointed the planning board secretary. Ms. Cotiga assists applicants in preparing their application, in addition to other city staff, planning our agendas, keeping our meeting minutes. Ms. Cotiga does not vote on the applications or other matters formally considered by this board. Also present this evening is one of our additional board professionals who, in addition to our attorney, is contracted annually by the board to provide input to the board. That would be Mr. Joe Burgess from Burgess Associates. Mr. Burgess is seated at the table to the right of the board or the public's left. Mr. Burgess will not vote on the applications or other matters considered by the board. Our board consists of 11 members. All members can participate in any hearings heard tonight, but a maximum of 9 can vote. All applications require a simple majority to be approved. Each application will begin with the respective applicant's attorney providing an overview of the application process to date and the variance relief requested. We then hear from any expert witnesses the applicant may have to help explain their application and why the variances requested are needed. The board members may ask questions of the applicant, their attorney, and their expert witnesses. Once the board professionals at the invitation of the chair and then board members have completed their questioning, the public will have an opportunity to ask questions. This is not the time to tell us what you think of the application. That opportunity comes at the end of each hearing. Before you ask your questions, please clearly state your name, spell your last name, and provide your address. It is important our stenographer be able to keep a clear and accurate public record. After all witnesses have been heard, members of the interested public have their second opportunity to speak, and at that time may express their opinion, positive or negative, about the application. The board attorney will swear each of these speakers in so that their comments have the full weight of sworn testimony, just as the applicant's witnesses does as well. Then the public portion of the hearing is closed, and we enter into deliberation where board members discuss the application and then vote. The public may listen to our deliberations, but will not normally be able to participate. The city zoning officer has asked that we remind all applicants that they must read carefully the resolution that documents the planning board's decision and to pay particular attention to the conditions contained in the resolution. For example, if a landscaping plan is required, you must obtain one and submit it to the city's forester. If a grading plan is required, you must have one prepared by a civil engineer and submit 3 copies along with the application fee to the city's engineering division. Failure to satisfy all conditions in the resolution will result in a delay in approving your application, as it will cause extra work for city land use staff. The resolutions documenting the board's decision will normally be available 1 month after we decide the application. All that said, we don't have any applications this evening, so glad it was a nice refresher for everyone.
There's going to be a test.
But yeah, everyone was taking notes or watching on
You have to say it
TV.
without reading it now.
Yeah. There's a number of administrative items we're going to, some acknowledge, some formally vote on, and then we'll move into the agenda. The first, perhaps and easiest to address, and we're shuffling these a little bit, is the oath of office. Mr. LaJoy is not here this evening, so we're not actually going to administer an oath as Mr. Falmouth and Ms. Bowen had previously been sworn and are simply changing their class within the board. So we're just acknowledging that as part of the meeting. Welcome. Thank you for your continued service. Keep doing what you're doing. So with that, and we'll acknowledge also that Ms. Balsan-Alvarez has arrived. We will be appointing a new board secretary, as I think everyone here has noticed, and anyone watching on YouTube this evening. Stephanie Sulios, after a number of years of distinguished service to the city, and we're grateful for all that she did for planning, for zoning, for land use in the city administration, has decided to move to a new professional opportunity outside of Summit. So in the interim, perhaps has been volunteered. I don't know how we want to characterize it, but we're grateful for it. Ms. Nicole Katiga, who serves as the deputy clerk in the city and has for a good number of years. And if you get the chance to watch the governing body work, she does a great job assisting Rosemary and the whole crew up there. She'll be with us to assist at the dais. And then sitting behind her in the office, we naturally have Augusto and Chris Nicola and any number of other folks on the city staffs who will be helping. So
Welcome.
Thank you.
welcome.
And thank you.
We are going to formally vote her in just for the sake of formalities, so I'll invite a motion to welcome
So
Ms.
moved.
Katiga. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. You want to do roll call or a voice vote?
You know what, actually, Ms. Katiga could do the roll call.
Should we do a roll call? Our first
And
yes.
make sure that everybody votes yes. So-
All right, so there we go.
This could be very
Or
awkward.
one of me.
Ms. Balsan-Alvarez.
Yes.
Ms. Bowen.
Yes.
Mr. Del Masso.
Yes.
Mayor Fagan.
Yes.
Mr. Felmett.
Yes.
Mr. Formicelli.
Yes.
Councilmember Hamlet.
Yes.
Mr. Stern.
Yes.
Chairman Spur.
Yes. All right, welcome aboard.
Prudent unanimity.
All right, off we go. All right, now we'll move on to the remainder of the agenda. And before we do, I expected, no offense, Hillary, I expected a larger showing here this evening. It's wonderful to see you. We'll address two resolutions fairly quickly with some discussion around the DRO. It's the second item there. We'll move into some public-facing discussion around cross-acceptance and municipal capital projects review before we break into closed session. I know there are members of the interested public who are interested in the housing element and fair share plan. This is the beginning for us as a planning board to begin formally engaging in that subject. We've decided that it's appropriate to break into closed session. We'll have the opportunity as a board to engage our board professionals, to lay a foundation and a greater understanding as to how we as a planning board are meant to engage in that process and, importantly, constructively interact with the public. So for anyone that may catch this coverage, be it live this evening or later perhaps in the TAP or elsewhere, know that public engagement on the topic of the housing element and fair share plan is coming, and we'll be sure to communicate that through the appropriate channels. But this evening, the planning board's going to break, kind of lay a solid foundation, and move from there. So more to come. But if anyone does have a question after this meeting, we'd invite them to reach out to Augusto and the city administration, but we'll post more information on that. So let's move so we can send Hillary home here. The first resolution we're considering is 2 Parkview Terrace, a request for extension. I assume that's why you're here. It is. If you'd like to come forward, just briefly, we see these from time to time. And this is, I believe, the first request for extension.
Yes.
So maybe just tell a little bit about where this stands and just some background on the request.
Okay. Hillary Ells from Dempsey and Sheehan, representing the applicants, Susan and Michael Ballo, 2 Parkview Terrace. Yes, so they received approval from this board for minor subdivision. We've actually submitted all of the documents to the city. I believe the mayor was supposed to sign the storm sewer agreement on the 19th. And we were told that the chairman was signing the subdivision deed. We just have not received those documents back, but as soon as we do, we can record them and then perfect the subdivision.
Okay, excellent.
And if I may add,
Please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, as the board is aware, it's a 190-day period for the filing of a minor subdivision, which prior to January 28th, which would have been the expiration, applicant's counsel requested an extension, 90-day extension, to do so for the reasons aforementioned. And certainly 47F of our MLUL authorizes the board to grant such a request, so long as there's a demonstration that the applicant was barred or prevented directly or indirectly from recording the deed prior, and promptly sought and has been diligent in pursuing all approvals and the ability to file the deed in a timely fashion. I think the reasons were set forth in a letter submitted by applicant's counsel with respect to the sewer easements and some other issues that they were required to await. And indeed, they did submit the deed for review back in October of 2024. So maybe that is relevant, I would submit it would be, to whether or not the applicant's been moving diligently. But I will let the board make that decision. We do have a resolution to adopt, assuming that the board wishes to grant the extension for 90 days, which would take us through April 28, 2025, which, if I understand correctly, should be more than enough time. So it would be a motion second, a roll call vote to adopt that resolution if it's the board's pleasure to grant the extension request.
Any questions of Ms. Oles or anyone else who may have seen this? Oh, this is fairly straightforward and administrative.
And also, to be clear, my apologies, everyone is entitled to vote even if you did not vote on the original minor subdivision application as an extension. You needn't have been involved previously.
Okay. So I didn't see anyone jump at opportunities for questions or clarification. Susan, anything on your mind? No? Go ahead, you can
I
ask.
saw the property was on the market, and I went by a couple days ago, and the sign was down. That's the only thing.
An observation. Okay, fair enough. I think that's not related, at least to this particular matter before us. So with that, I would just ask for a motion to approve. Anyone want to jump at it?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Nicole, if you give us a roll call.
Ms. Balsan Alvarez,
Yes.
Ms. Bowen,
Yes.
Mr. Del Masso,
Yes.
Mayor Fagan,
Yes.
Mr. Felmet,
Yes.
Mr. Formicelli,
Yes.
Councilmember Hamlet,
Yes.
Mr. LaJoy, Mr. Sala, Mr. Stern,
Yes.
Chairman Spur.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right, easy pickings. All right, next we can move to the second resolution for this evening, which is noted here as the final draft 2024 DRO revisions review. We had last year initiated what we intend to be an annual process of a review and revision to the DRO. It's something that the board is entitled to identify opportunities for the governing body to then hopefully adopt at our recommendation or in consultation with us, following further amendment. There was no revision, frankly, to the ordinance, to the resolution you saw in your board packet. Joe and his team just cleaned up a little bit some of the matters there for us to transmit up to the governing body for their consideration and their input. It does not preclude us. In fact, we're excited, I would even say, to again in 2025 dig into some of the matters that are on kind of everyone's mind. I know Councilwoman Hamlet had flagged for us noise ordinance was a particular point of focus. There's been some community concern around the BMS site, ongoing construction, and there be maybe an opportunity not just to address that particular matter, but use it as an opportunity to examine the noise ordinance more carefully. So I'm not certain if anyone had any questions. Again, there's been no change to this since we had last seen it, but what we want to do is approve a resolution to be transmitted up to the governing body. The governing body will work their magic. And it would ultimately, we hope, be returned to us for consistency review, but I don't know, Joe, if there's anything else you wanted to add to it.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. You will be getting this back
Right.
for a final review, and I know we always call it a consistency review, but the statute technically also says in any other issue that's on your mind. I did not quote the statute directly. So you will have another bite at the apple, so to speak.
Cool, excellent. And maybe before we do vote on the resolution, we had Jennifer and I at least informally talked about Jennifer, Paul, and Paul Formicelli, and Peter LaJoy, sorry, Paul. Peter LaJoy had, again, volunteered to kind of stand as our subcommittee on DRO review and revision. And I think the first thing for us to accomplish with this is continue the pace of annual review, and the volume and significance of the change will probably wax and wane over the years. But to kind of just build that habit and build that muscle of looking at the DRO, bringing forth recommendations from the zoning board's annual report, from what our professionals may identify, from what the community may be clamoring for, what city administration may identify. There's really ample opportunity to help kind of codify those recommendations. So hopefully that pace of annually addressing them, and if we're really shooting for the stars, we'll even see a resolution for 2025 before the end of the year, but I don't want to promise anything.
Shooting for the star. Yeah. No, it's a great habit, always intended to be done. Once it was done, 4 years ago.
Yep.
Didn't happen, but it needs to happen.
So that's awesome.
So I'm glad we're doing that.
With any questions?
Any
Yeah,
questions or tweaks from anybody? Suggestions? No?
I think so.
I have.
Yeah, no, Jennifer, if
That's
you
all right.
have little tweaks, we
Does
can.
anybody else, though? Because I don't want to necessarily need to lead the pack.
Well, tell us.
Go for it.
All right.
Lead the way.
All right, so how do I tell you where I am? Because mine doesn't have page numbers. So, section, no, let's see. Section 10, under roof, and then you go all the way down to J, and then it says roof-mounted lighting fixtures shall not exceed a height of 10 feet above the roof deck, which the fixture is intended to illuminate. I see a lot of rooftop additions in my biz, for commercial. It just seems high to me, because you're already adding something. And, you want the public right-of-ways to not really, you don't want it to overpower the existing building. I just wondered if 10 feet is a good height or not.
That's about as low as you should have such features. Fixtures lower than that just don't throw enough
Right.
spread of light.
But from a view shed standpoint from further away, it may not be, every site is different. And, some rooftop additions aren't visible from anywhere. They're just not. And then other places, they're the only building, it's the tallest building, and there's nothing around it, and, it's everything on top of that building is super visible. So it is a very much a site-by-site situation. So, I don't know, that stuck out to me, but if you think that's protocol,
I
we'll stick
do.
with it.
Actually, you typically will see these fixtures at 12 to 14 feet in height.
Okay.
So we had lowered it.
Okay, great. All right. So I'll go with your expertise there. And the only other thing that I had on this page was actually up above. B and D talk about rooftop amenity spaces and using some basic, minimum of 10 foot from the exterior front of the building, a setback, which is great, 5 feet from the exterior of the side, et cetera. And then no more than 40% of the rooftop. Those are all good starting points. But on the other hand, another way to do it is just to speak to visibility instead, because just like for the same reason, some rooftops are going to be flanked by, I'm thinking of other cities, but, flanked by bigger buildings where you're never going to see it. So they should, maybe get more. And then in other instances where they're so visible, maybe they should be set back.
What we could do
More to
in
that.
resolutions, what we could do is say 6 months after they're installed, the engineer for the municipality or the board will go and review it, and if need be, adjust the lights accordingly.
Oh, no, not about lighting, just about the actual rooftop spaces. I moved up to B and.
No, but I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
also in
Yeah.
terms of their location.
Right.
If it's
Yeah,
not
yeah, okay.
properly
If I
lighting
may,
the area.
Yeah,
also, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but these would be the standards. So if a particular applicant were to come in and say, you can't see my rooftop on my building very well, I should have more than 40%, or I should be closer, et cetera. Therein lies the basis potentially for deviation from the standard. But this is
the baseline.
the baseline from
Right.
which they can, as of right,
Correct.
Right.
obtain up to 40%.
Right.
So the point, in my opinion, is well taken, but I think the release valve there is it's a standard from which
Variance.
someone can request a deviation.
Yeah. I'm just thinking
If
out
they
loud
justify
and
it.
wanted some input from the board about whether we want to restrict people.
Which I would,
Or not.
I would almost go the other way with it,
Yeah.
where I could see why you might want this here, which is to at least have a semblance of control over the use.
Mhm.
And in the various ways it could potentially be used or abused, depending on who's thinking about it.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, from the worst case scenario, if it's even worst, but from a density scenario of, I
Right.
don't know, turning an entire 10,000 square foot rooftop on a commercial building into, I don't know, a wedding and bar mitzvah space or something like that,
Right.
that with music going and maybe a little bit over the top for depending
We're
on
gonna
what
have
else
a
is
good
near.
noise
And even if you can't
ordinance
see it, right, the
improvement
noise is still
there.
there. There might be some things like
Right.
that might help us to kind of
Right.
manage around.
And then the other thing I'm thinking is like the prod zone where they have, that's like Merck, or, you know, like,
Yes.
that is such a huge campus, you know, if they're doing something way over, like, I don't even know if anybody would, so I don't know. I just
Yeah.
wanted
I
to
know,
throw it
'cause
out there
I
for
spent most of the
discussion.
morning
And
over there.
You know what I would throw the other thing out there is if you were to not limit it in some way, if it precluded or grandfathered the building in a way that might allow it to skirt other things that might come up in the future about, I don't know, electrical panels, for solar panels or other infrastructure that might become
Yeah.
important later on, but maybe isn't quite
Yeah.
there yet.
Mhm.
So,
Okay,
I don't know.
thanks for the discussion, appreciate it. So we'll just leave it.
Okay.
For
No, I
now.
think that was the point of it, this section, this entire section on rooftop amenities had arose out of a lack of point of reference.
Anything.
Right? There was really nothing outside
didn't
of
have
the
much.
usual,
Yeah.
what's baked in there right now. So
Yep.
the fact that I think the board can see value in both sides of the arguments, and when hopefully the governing body were to adopt these and they were to be released into the wild, we'll get some feedback from applicants that are, really the ones that are trying to make sense of this in a commercial setting,
Yep.
so.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead,
quick
Christine.
question. The only thing I would add is maybe putting, I think it's in D, maybe just referencing the noise ordinance. Two questions on that, I guess, is, one question, I guess, is when we do address the noise ordinance, I would want to look at how we are monitoring that after hours, because our police do not have a decibel reading machine, so I think it's important to sort of, when we do get to the noise ordinance, we have to kind of solve that problem, because if residents call and complain, there's no one to actually check. The other thing I wanted to mention, it was interesting, I was over at BMS today, and they had just installed the bafflers around the big air conditioning units, and I guess I learned, and Joe, you would probably know the history of this, but the air conditioning units that were on top of the one building, apparently when Celgene owned that property, they were used more, they had like animals in there, from what I understand. Does anybody know? Is that right?
Oh, wow.
Vivarium. That's the word. So it was a vivarium, and so they actually required more of the air conditioning.
Right, there's air circulation. at much
Right,
higher
air
level.
circulation that higher. So it was like an easy fix, and it made sense. So, but you've had these neighbors complaining for years about this humming. So I just think it's an important, when residents complain and complain and complain, a lot of this thing a lot of these things are actually very solvable.
Right.
And it was actually kind of a good story, because I was like, oh, I never knew that. And they didn't need that much capacity for the air handler, so,
Cool.
I don't know. Just a fun fact.
Good
No,
job.
Vivarium, cool, I didn't think.
So in
that was-
item
Yeah.
3D.
Historical minute.
Yeah.
In item
I
3D.
never knew what a vivarium
job.
was until today.
I think none of this language is meant to conflict with, the noise ordinance as it exists today, or
Right.
will be amended positively moving forward. So, I don't know, Steve, I think we could add conceivably under that
Not
section.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I was going to ask, under item 3D.
Just to
We could
acknowledge.
just reference
Yep.
the
Yeah.
noise ordinance.
Right. Yeah, just simply to acknowledge, and I don't think it's language.
What is the noise ordinance?
As it relates.
Where's 3D?
Oh, it's,
It's on the last
on the last
page.
page.
It's on the last page.
Under-
Oh, on the amenity
Are-
predate,
yeah,
I got you, I'm
yeah,
sorry, gotcha.
Just a line simply to acknowledge that none of this is intended to conflict with or supersede the noise ordinance as it may exist. And
You can always,
I won't recite that from memory, but Paul asks a good question. And it sounds like it may be something for this board to look at more carefully is in fact the noise ordinance. as
Just
part
to
of the
pitch
DRO
in,
procedure.
yeah, so, under section 3, police regulations is where you can find the, noise ordinance standards. I do also want to highlight that currently, as our noise ordinance exists, it is not in line with the county standard, and so that's one of the issues that
Higher
the
or
department. I think that the county standard is a little higher than ours. In terms of decibel readings and the certifications required to accurately take those readings.
Right.
So that's something that DCS has looked into in the past and will have to, but that's also more of a police regulation matter and health department, so we'll work with them, and whatever comes before the board could be considered. But realistically, this section of the DRO can still make reference regardless of what the language is or can be. So, yeah.
Okay. Will
I
do.
have two comments, and one comes from my experience of living on a lake. These noise ordinances are just sort of weird. For example, at Lake Opatcong, the only way you can test one of these huge jet boats is when it's at the dock at idle, which is not when it's loud. So I just think that we need to think about very clearly how we're going to test, what we're going to test, what the level is, and what's just makes sense for a policeman at 10:30 at night who's trying to
Right.
Right,
do this.
Yeah.
yeah.
Right, and then my second question, the third one under the rooftop lighting, you can't buy a light bulb in Home Depot that doesn't have an app that allows you to change the color. So I think strobe and flashing is great, let's not have that.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't want somebody to get caught up in this regulation just because they can make their, you know how LEDs are sometimes blue and sometimes amber? I don't know that we particularly care very much about that. I think we care very much about strobes and flashing,
Sure.
but not these other things.
Color as much.
Color.
Okay, cool. Good input for sure. I think the noise ordinance conversation certainly would be taken up in depth within the DRO review and revision for this year, for 2025. But it's a good specific point there around the strobes and what have you, and changing technologies with light bulbs.
Yeah, and it'll only get more over time. I mean, I'm just buying light bulbs for my house, and I'm like, I just want a light bulb. It doesn't need to sing.
Amazing. So the action for us to take this evening is for this set of revision recommendations from the planning board, is to send those to the governing body. And then all the good ideas that will continue to percolate here and elsewhere is to bring that to our subcommittee, and then at the appropriate time, in addition to everything else that we're doing here on the planning board, to have some discussion around how we can make recommendations specific to the noise ordinance or anything else that's relevant. So I would invite a motion to approve this resolution, sending our 2024 DRO revision recommendations to the governing body. Any takers? So moved. A second?
Second.
Second. Just a roll call, Nicole, when you can.
Ms. Balzan Alvarez?
Yes.
Ms. Bowen?
Yes.
Mr. Dalmasso?
Yes.
Mayor Fagan?
Yes.
Mr. Felmet?
Yes.
Mr. Formicelli?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamlet?
Yes.
Chairman Spur?
Yes.
And just to
Oh,
clarify,
and Mr. Stern.
Yes.
just to clarify, that was to include the
With
noise
the,
ord-
with that,
ordinance
yeah, reference to the noise ordinance, which.
I will get that. I'm out of the office most of tomorrow, so it might be Wednesday.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, moving then out of resolutions to discussions. We have two discussion points here, again, before we break for our housing element and fair share plan,
So we'll have to-
closed session. The first is cross-acceptance, for which there was a memo generously shared by our friends at Burgess Associates around all the excitement that's occurring on the cross-acceptance front. I've trusted that the board members have read and studied that memorandum
There will be attached.
diligently. But in case they haven't, Joe, would you mind just giving us a 10,000-foot view as to where cross-acceptance stands?
Okay. about 24 years ago, the state adopted a 427-page state development and redevelopment plan. It was very detailed, it was very impressive, and they didn't touch it since. So now they've come up with about a 30-pager, which really doesn't say much of anything. And most significantly, the State Office of Planning Advocacy just this past week has started their county meetings. They're required to have one county meeting for all 21 counties in the state. I had staff that attended one here in Union and one in Mercer County, and it's the same group that presented at both meetings. And the most important thing that they said was that this document is now just an advisory document, and local zoning will supersede its recommendations.
So what's the point of the document?
Right.
And if anyone could answer that, I'd love to hear the answer.
I think the good news is they were supposed to do it every 3 years, starting 24 years ago. And since it's only advisory, it's probably a good thing that they didn't do it every 3 years, particularly starting out with a 471-page document. But yeah, what is the importance now, particularly since I think, what is it targeted for as soon as effectively the fourth round of affordable housing ends?
Yes.
That's when this comes into play, and some would argue that it was meant to inform the fourth round of affordable housing process. So I guess it'll be informing the process, not to put a tongue, as we lawyers like to say, because we get extra for Latin, after the fact.
After.
Maybe it'll inform the fifth round.
Yeah, there you go, there you go.
And not to jump too deep in the memo,
Sorry
but
about
that's.
the aside.
No, it's helpful reference, because that, as you had said regarding the advisory reference, and then also where it falls relative to round four is a layman, for which we are, veteran here, planning, volunteers, what have you. I would suggest that this is a really meaningful and impactful opportunity for municipalities, counties to align around a vision for the developments in the state. But what should we make of this, especially for the planning board? Where should we rank this in terms of our priorities, and what input can and should we provide?
Much lower down on the list of priorities. It's unfortunate because we were all in the field, we were very much looking forward to this document. It was supposed to be presented last March, and the reason why it took so long, we all assumed, was because they were spending so much time refining the prior goals and recommendations from the large state plan and its mapping. Now they have told us, this modest-sized document, it's advisory, and the mapping isn't changing. So after all that consternation and waiting for that mapping to change to see where the different, land use categories were being placed, we're using the same mapping from 24 years ago. And as we all know, nothing much has changed in land use in New Jersey in the past 24 years. So it's unfortunate. So I would suggest we don't dwell too heavily on, the first step in the cross-acceptance process, which is to identify your three priority, goals. I am suggesting to many municipalities that one of the things you might want to suggest as a priority goal is for the state to give consideration to a refined method to come up with a realistic affordable housing obligation for municipalities. Because roughly 400 municipalities have filed with the state for the fourth round, identifying their numbers. Close to half of that has suggested modifying their number. And there's others that have not suggested modifying the number, but just informing the state that they will be coming in with a vacant land adjustment without identifying a number. Yeah, and that's one of the things we suggested you do. So it's, if there's ever a priority goal, I think it would be that. you know, we'll talk in closed session in more detail about that issue. You know, you can have a discussion about what other priority goals you might have that you think is not just important to you, but important statewide. But as I said, you know, I just want to think about it, you know, on your own, and then we could have a discussion about that at another meeting, because it's not due until, for another month or two. But it's unfortunate, because them having said that this is only advisory, it's really lost its impetus for focus, concentration.
So maybe just on that point, though, real quick, is it may be advisory, but to the extent that, say, when we're hearing applications, we could reasonably expect an applicant to reference it as one of the guiding resources that they may have to rationalize a pursuit of whatever variance relief or whatever they may be seeking. So it's not to be ignored, but it will not be as compelling in planning rationale as a master plan.
Right, if I may, under the prior plan, all planners were using that document as a guide and arguing special reasons and negative criteria issues before boards throughout the state. This is significantly watered down that possibility. And you're right, you know, you can turn to any planner that makes that type of argument and just simply say, isn't it true that it no longer carries the weight that the other plan did? So,
I think one of the items here, I personally at least don't speak for the board necessarily about, focus on unfunded mandates and affordable housing, the rationale and approach, what have you. One of the most substantial items you had flagged here was point 3 in the memo around mapping changes, and that the majority of the municipality, the vast majority of the municipality, sits within planning zone 1, which is urban, I believe.
Yes.
And that though is that discussion is nested within this advisory body. It could represent a meaningful change for Summit if we were to see those lines shift. And I would invite you, if this is the appropriate forum or time, to speak to, is that a reasonable objective that we could set, is to have those lines re-examined?
we can look at that for you for the next meeting if you'd like. I will tell you that the Metropolitan Planning Area Number 1, which is what we're in, covers probably the northern, close to a third of the state. So it's not like they've selected small little areas here and there. It's a very broad area. And that was also always one of the problems with the mapping, that it covers such a large area, it became somewhat meaningless.
Right, okay. I think as this has emerged as advisory, and I think it's Joe, you or Tom from your office, Augusto, were you participating? Who else was participating in this from a municipality's perspective? Who's representing municipality in the cross-acceptance?
It would be, well,
The county.
yeah, the county.
Sorry, who from Summit is engaging with the county?
That is myself
Yep.
and the planner.
Okay. So I think what at least I had flagged here was a need to provide direction to you to the extent that you need it, frankly. So much of this is drawn from census data, statistics that are otherwise publicly available, but I think what we will do, at least offline, is as this process unfolds, thankfully, Augusto, you sit on this body, so there's an easy interface there. Look at that, how lucky we are. To ensure that if we need to spin up a more substantial discussion around, in this case, planning priorities, which is really the only place in that template form where there's opportunity, wiggle room, to kind of debate and discuss. I don't think, and you can both speak to it, is there any other input, timely input, that you would need to continue to meaningfully engage the county?
No, probably the most critical one for Summit is Planning Area 5, which is the environmental constraints. But unfortunately, they mandate, I'm pretty certain it says 10 acres. A environmental constraint has to encompass minimally 10 acres together for them to even consider it a Planning Area 5 designation, but we can look into that.
Okay, so yeah, I think, as you noted, Joe, this is in a sense deprioritized for the planning board only in such that between you, Joe, Augusto, are able to really kind of drive an effective interface with the county and then ultimately with the state. But we can put some thought separately outside of this meeting room, particularly around the planning priorities that may be helpful. As you, Joe, have shared 8 potential kind of, points of focus that we can, in fact, relay from the perspective of appointed or elected officials here in the municipality where we believe those points of focus should be. But I don't believe it requires too substantial a conversation or too much time to be dedicated to do that, or formal action on the part of the board. Not seeing that. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sat in on the cross-acceptance meeting that Tom and Augusto, and I think the mayor, a few of us were on, and I certainly expressed my frustration in the nicest way that I could in regards to just being an elected official and having to have 2 public-facing, really important issues, driving down the road at the same time. And I think that there was a lot of other planners and municipalities that felt the same way. I sort of feel like, to your point, Joe, it's a really important thing, and we just feel like, we don't want to just go through the motions, but we're sort of being forced to, which is a little frustrating. And I think this would actually give Union County, at least, an opportunity to bring all these municipalities and then start to create that master plan. So it is a little unfortunate that we're rushing it. I can't understand why the housing isn't in the same, the realm. My one question is, do the public input sessions count as public input for Summit, or do we need to have our own public input? Because as you know, we're going to be having public input per fair share housing element plan. Do we need to have separate, for the CART, do we need to have separate public input sessions for the cross-acceptance?
There is no, if I recall correctly, there is no statutory requirement for individual municipalities to have these meetings. It is, the statutory requirement is at the county level.
And that each municipality submit the responses to the question template to the county, who is the negotiating entity for the city.
Correct. Yeah, there is I have it with me, a 2.5-page template that the cross-acceptance process requires us to fill out. And it basically asks us, what kind of master plan elements and ordinances and natural resource inventory data has the municipality prepared, and if so, we send them a copy. Identify the 10 goals of this new state plan and how we feel about them, and we'll put that together. Any inconsistency between the county plan and the state plan and the local, the Summit plan, identify those inconsistencies. And that's basically the thrust of it. And then we have to identify and sign who prepared. I'll let Augusta sign this.
But we don't have to let them, we don't have to agree, right? They're the negotiating entity, but if we disagree, we can take a different course, correct?
Yes, correct.
Ultimately, on that meeting, what was mostly expressed is that the individual municipalities' willingness to participate is simply what's going to be shaping the county's response to the state plan, right? Their goal is to just receive the input and, through our own vehicles and mechanisms, whether, I believe that as part of the CART, to answer the question, there are suggestions that you could have a public outreach survey on what does the public think that their goals for their town is, et cetera. They could be specific questions relating to very minute things or just broad-ranging, I'd like to see more walkable neighborhoods, et cetera, or something like that. So in preparing the response, those things can be ironed out, and I've already had a couple conversations with Tom Behrens, and like Joe said, it's just a matter of providing meaningful feedback to the county so that Summit can have its say in what we think the county plan should look like. That's really the important part of this.
But it's clear that in the end, it's the county that then negotiates with the Office of Planning State Advocacy.
Quick question. Excuse me. On the last bullet here on the memo, and regards to the county master plan, 1998, last time they did it. Does that have any impact on this process, given the age of it? And how does that, like, is that average for the state? If we look across counties, how long, how dated are the county master plans? And is that something that we should be concerned about, and anything
Well,
not really?
I think it should be something that we should all be concerned about, but is fairly consistent with what's happening all over the state. There are some counties that haven't prepared a new county plan for 40 years. So, the one thing the county does do on a regular basis is a transportation element. You know, they're concerned about their roads, so that they focus on. In fact, Union adopted a new transportation master plan in, as it says here, 2016.
Got it. So the county doesn't have the same, like, statutory obligation that we do in terms of
Right.
our REX and our
No.
master
That's
plan,
the
which
irony,
is 10
right?
years.
No.
They can do it for 30 or 40.
And because, you know, when you think about what the county's responsibilities are, so much of it is transportation-based, because the municipalities control, you know, the land use decisions, not the county.
Just out of curiosity, Joe, do you know, when was the last time prior to 2016 that that transportation? When was the last time prior to 2016, if you know, that the transportation plan was done
that-
before that? Was that 10 years or 50 years?
That I don't know. It might have been 1998,
Okay.
because I think there were multiple elements done then.
So I think the offer of the planning board is to be made available to Augusto, to Joe and Tom, to be an avenue to solicit input as is helpful in preparation of, for example, the templated form, or as this process unravels and hopefully the county is receptive to more input and more debate and discussion amongst the diversity of municipalities they represent. So the planning board is obviously, in addition to the administration, elected officials, available to provide that interface. And thirdly, we'll be sensitive in the work that we're doing with housing element and fair share plan, and the anticipation also of the master plan reexamination later in the year, that as we continue to collect public input, we'll make sure that's fed into this document. But this, to me at least, feels like, you know, any kind of negotiating process where, if anything, it's a question of prioritization. That, you know, we just, as elected officials, as appointed officials, need to help kind of guide prioritization of what we communicate, because Lord knows the county, there's more than enough work to be done. So, okay. So with that, and well, I'll continue to bring to this agenda cross-acceptance as is appropriate, but we've heard, unfortunately today, kind of where that needs to sit in overall prioritization.
I think the next public meeting is this Tuesday, I believe. The first
For the
is in, for the county is
Like in Cranford.
in Cranford, I think,
Yeah,
on Tuesday.
6 o'clock, I think.
Yeah, okay. Next item, before we break for our executive session, is municipal capital projects review. And Delia Hamlet, being the sleuth that she is, raised a great question in our last meeting as to how can the planning board better interface with, for example, CAP committee of the governing body, or really just the capital projects planning process in the municipality. How could that be better, right? What model exists for that kind of an interface? And Joe dug deep and found all kinds of little nuggets. So I hope, again, everyone has had the opportunity to read the memo. But Joe, if you want to surface kind of some of your
Certainly.
findings.
Well, this was interesting because it's rare for a planning board to get involved in a capital improvement program. I could count on practically one finger how many times I've seen this done. It's, you know, nobody really focuses on this, and when they do, in the rare instances that I've seen it done, it was for one particular project. The question that Delia had raised really was, you know, town-wide. So, you know, going through the municipal land use law, you know, if we find, as you've hopefully read, you have a lot of power if you want to use it. And it's really not your decision in the end. It's the governing body is the one that will, direct you to put something together. But if they do, the powers are pretty substantial in terms of the process that you have to go through, and the information that you gather. The statute identifies the fact that, every department has to be responsive to you, and it's spelled out in the legislation that if you ask for information, they are obligated to give it to you. Any agency that is preparing a capital improvement program is obligated to send it to the planning board if they're going to be preparing a plan. The plan that you put together has to be for at least a 6-year period. You have to identify not only the project, but the details of it, including costs and operating expenses and maintenance costs and potential or probable revenues that come, that are part of the whole process. So it's a significant effort on the part of the planning board. It can be very worthwhile. The one thing I didn't mention, it even has the Board of Education required to respond to you, and any capital improvement program that the Board of Ed has to come to you first. So there's a lot going on here.
So I can feel the heartburn overcoming Augusto right now, thinking about the level of effort that could be undertaken, let alone resourcing required to take full grasp of these potential, we'll call them responsibilities generously. I wanted to naturally open the floor for any questions folks may have about this. I think the natural next step, because this is new information to a lot of us here in a lot of different roles, is probably to return this back to the governing body. This new information, this concept, to the CAP committee, to Mike McTiernan, our council president, and to foster conversation, informal conversation at least, about if and when we may even want to begin exploring this new empowerment of the planning board, how it may be duplicative to some of the coordination that is occurring, unbeknownst to us, between CAP and planning and other elements of the administration. But I'll at least open the floor. Any questions for members of the board that this may be new news to, that this is an opportunity for the planning board potentially to take a more affirmative role in capital projects planning in the municipality. Any questions? Oh, sorry. I'll give it-
What I like about this is the timing. I think it's kind of the perfect timing, considering we're working on so many different things. And I think from where I sit, I see so many things being planned in a silo, whether it's the city or the Board of Ed. And the other thing everybody has to remember is a lot of our properties, X number of a playground is BOE and X number it's the city. So we're funding a lot of playground projects. They're funding some playground projects, and some playground projects aren't even getting done. The PTOs are doing them. So I think it's actually an interesting time to be having these discussions. In addition, in the cross acceptance process, they're going to be doing the infrastructure assessment through. Is it Rutgers?
Yep.
Rutgers. So I'm curious to see how well that will be looked at. And I also think that any solar initiatives, we're doing if we do a solar analysis, whether it's the Board of Ed or a power purchasing agreement, on top of all these roofs and everything, I think it's actually a really good opportunity to engage the Board of Ed, and the cross acceptance calls for the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Get with your historical committee, your Board of Ed. So I think it's a bear, but I'm certainly an advocate for having further discussion. So thanks for doing all your hard work.
Thank you.
Any questions kind of about the memo? Or, oh, sorry.
I would just say, and sort of echo what Delia said about, I think it's a good opportunity, it's good timing. I worry a little bit about the amount of time and the amount of energy and the amount of effort it will take. But so Joe, I'm sort of looking to you to ask, you mentioned that this is not widespread, it's not used kind of in across municipalities. Do you have any inklings as to why that may be? Is it too onerous, or is it?
I think it's primarily because boards, governing bodies, don't often want to give power away. Certainly, boards of education won't be happy with it. So politically, I think people shy away from it. And quite frankly, planning boards, they're all volunteers.
Right.
And this is a time-consuming prospect. The benefit is that it takes a look at all these disparate entities and agencies that are doing things, as you started to mention, and now you're going to get a good handle on all that's taking place at once and see all these different pieces and figure out better how to make them fit together.
Could it be as opposed to the creation of the capital improvement plans, but more of a review of the capital improvement plans to make sure there's like consistency across them, which may eliminate some of the workload for the board?
The statute doesn't specifically talk about it in that context, but I think between Steve and myself, we could look into that.
It's an interesting concept because one would think that if the governing body can authorize and the planning board can accept the implementation of the capital improvement program as a whole, still subject to the governing body's ultimate determination, that a lesser role, such as a review role, should be within the authority of the planning board under the statute. But I will tell you, if and when you do it, 30 years, you'll be my first board. So, not much,
No, I've only done it once,
I'm not.
and it was probably 30-some years ago.
There you go.
And it was for one
I was just a little too late.
particular project.
We do like to be the first to do things here in Summit, so.
That's right, there you go.
Maybe I should stop reading the MLU.
I'm curious, Augusto, what your perspective is on this, just from a workload on city staff perspective.
So, from what I know of the capital projects process is that, let's talk about, for example, road repavings or new sidewalks, right? The engineering division already has a system for prioritization for public infrastructure based off of the metrics of everything from quality of the road to, you know, identified areas for stormwater pooling, poor drainage issues, either reports from the public or active inspections by the inspectors. So, you know, and through this review process, funds get apportioned through capital, and engineering just takes the liberty, well, not the liberty, but the very correct approach of very deterministically and analytically looking at what is the next piece of infrastructure that should be improved. And so, from the, you know, being on the inside looking out, it's saying this is the most effective process, because we already have the stamped and sealed certified professionals who are saying, we definitely need to do this, and this is definitely our next step on our list of priorities to improve public infrastructure. And sometimes we understand that being on the outside looking in, you might ask yourself, a resident might ask themselves, is like, well, why is the road next door getting repaved, but mine isn't? It's like, what is getting apportioned? What's happening on the sidelines to change that? So I think that the workflow would still continue, but you're adding a step to the process. And then you're asking yourself, do you really need a significant public input session on, you know, this half-a-mile stretch of sidewalk, which is known to be in disrepair? Or, and you look at the other hand and you have educational institution projects or community projects. You're looking at the last council meeting, for example, David Guida gave a wonderful presentation on the park that we're redoing. You know, they brought up that wonderful diagram of the owl, that's a capital project,
Right.
right? Would it be intelligent for this board to put itself in a position to say, yes, we want to sign off on the owl play structure, right? I don't know if that would be within the desire of the board to do that. How do I see this as useful? If you have a particularly controversial road infrastructure project, maybe public input is absolutely necessary. Does it need to be done at the board level? Perhaps not, but for example, I know for a fact that the engineering division, they constantly reach out to members of the public and impacted communities for that vital input, and they reconcile that input with the schematics provided either by our in-house engineering or external consultants. So there already exists a very time-consuming and extensive review process for the improvement of public infrastructure, and it's a huge responsibility for this board to ask itself, do we need to add another step? And that is something, that is a reason why I believe that many towns don't do something like this. Not to say that this doesn't have its merits, which it definitely does. You know, this is the kind of thing that can help a town and its elected officials or its board members or members of the public really shape how they want their city to look. But is it an operational necessity for this board? Is it a necessity for the city? I don't know if that answer is so readily, available.
So in my mind, if I may, something you just said, engineering looks at the roads and the infrastructure, and then we have DCP looking at projects for playgrounds and things like that. We have BOE managing their facilities and their properties. And I think probably, given that we've had many conversations about the coordination or lack thereof and the kicking the can down the road, I think, is this an opportunity to really look from a 30,000-foot view of the entire town and really be able to prioritize where the capital goes? And I think that's probably why the question was even asked in the first place. And I understand that, given that, it's hard. It's hard to manage all of the assets that we have, whether it's a road or a sidewalk or a playground or a building, because we have so many. And so I know that there was a facilities manager conversation at some point, but that hasn't happened. And I think it's worthy of conversation, because I think that part of the reason the question was raised is because there doesn't feel like there's enough collaboration and a really solid look forward. And so that I would just ask that we all consider that. I know that that's a big job, and maybe that's a paid position and not the planning board's job, but I think it's a valuable conversation to have.
Agreed.
I think that moving us off of this, then at least the two things that really kind of resonated with me and will carry this forward behind the scenes is, Paul, you said there's a right-sizing conversation to this, right? Because you're correct, Augusto. I'm not interested in approving each and every sidewalk that needs to be built in the municipality. Sorry, guys, that somebody else can do that. Or to your point, it's formulaic. There's an established process for it. It works. It's fair. It's impartial. To that level of granularity, it probably doesn't make sense. So there's a right-sizing question. But to Councilwoman Hamlet, this is a great time, frankly, with master plan reexamination coming up, to consider kind of starting a new, fresh chapter. So there's more conversation to come on this. I appreciate, Joe, you and your firm preparing this information. I think the conversation will move next to elected officials and city administration to see how we want to prioritize it, when and if and how we want to even pursue it. But it was a great question to raise for sure. And if the board doesn't re-raise it in a couple of months' time, if you haven't heard anything, members of the interested public watching dutifully at home, please ask about it. And let's see. It's an opportunity, I think, as Joe has rightfully suggested, for us to stitch together what is otherwise a disconnected but important coordination effort. But we've got a lot on our plate this year. So let's see if it's something else we want to take on.
If I could just add one thing. I liked what Augusto said, but I'm not sure that each and every capital improvement project has to be reviewed.
Right.
It may be, and you could set a threshold
That's right.
for the types that come
Or
before the
types.
planning board.
Fall into certain categories, that's
Yeah.
the thing.
Or if there are programs or playgrounds or what have you, where there are multiple, whether the city does some, the board does some, and the PTO does the balance, like, there should be some sort of consistency
Right.
for some projects, clearly not all.
I would say, like, major infrastructural
Yeah.
projects
Right.
are not something anybody here is qualified to even get, from a 30,000-foot perspective, nothing will look right until you get into the weeds on that, no matter what. I've seen that for clients all across the board, and you have to realize if there's a process in place, unless there's a clear problem with the process, there's probably a very good reason for why it works the way it works. And to interfere with that would probably not be in everybody's best interest. But when it comes to something that is less than infrastructural, but something like playground, capital deployment for special projects.
Additions on schools.
Correct, those are the things that probably.
New city hall.
require- Yes,
You know,
right,
things like that,
Right,
park, you know,
exactly. Things that.
the
things that
village
don't-
green.
That don't allow, maybe the cars going across town, we can't let that fail.
No.
But when it comes to
Yeah.
maybe figuring out how much to invest on a thing that might last 20 years or 100 years, that is, you know, not infrastructural, that's, I
Yeah.
think, the best place for us to really.
I agree with you, yep.
If I may, just one, but regardless of what the board ultimately does, at a bare minimum, we'll continue to have our statutory role under Section 31 to hear capital
At the
courtesy
construction
review.
documents.
Courtesy
stage.
review, courtesy reviews of capital projects, location, et cetera. And I know, you know, it's recommendatory, our role, but again, we'll always have that role. We'll always
I
have
do have to
Paris.
say, I did a bunch of research a long time ago, and I found at least 10 or 12 municipalities who said they reviewed capital improvements such as additions to schools and things like that, because I was just curious about it. Because I just thought, this is millions and millions of dollars, and, you know, the planning board doesn't get to say anything about it, or the
But-
zoning board?
No, what Steve is saying is,
We
this-
do
and
get
this
to- we
board
get to
has.
No,
Oh,
but
but
I
it's-
was checking, and maybe it was just written, you know, because it seemed to be a very standard way. Some of them were more more similar than others, but it seemed to be written in such a way that wasn't just the cursory review. And that's why I was like, oh my gosh, well, they seem to be doing it, and they seem to be doing it. And I wasted a lot of time like looking at statutes and getting blurry-eyed, but I thought seemed to be a thing. And I also looked in this is 10 years ago, MLUL, and it did seem to be something that we could do before construction documents when it's why do they, honestly, it's nice they come, it's nice to say hello and all of that, but there's really no utility to it. I've never seen a change. Well, no, one change was made just because I had a relationship with the Board of Ed guy, but that's it.
When they did the lower field at the high
Yeah,
school,
That's right.
they came here, we sat here for 2-3 hours, giving them recommendations, and 8 AM the next morning, there were 50 bulldozers up
Right.
there.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a
Yep.
back end
Yeah.
perfunctory, just not progress.
Like,
So,
just
it would be nice.
courtesy review. That's
If it was something actually meaningful, because we do know the DRO really well, we do know our town really well, we know our master plan really well, so we might actually add a little value.
Yeah.
We might.
Yeah, I think
If
if
we're
there's an
spending millions
opportunity
and
to
millions
take
of
like
dollars.
an intermediary step sooner than later, so that, I don't know if it's the chair or somebody can at least passively see what's going on and maybe have the power to work with the governing body or whoever to bring certain projects beyond a cursory review, because I agree with Mr. Stern here. It seems like mostly a waste of time when we're reviewing things that just see you later, walk out the door, bulldozers go in. And if no one's looking at it from the 30,000-foot perspective, then it seems like this would be a good place for somebody to do that. So I don't think we should kick the can too long,
No.
personally.
No, and to add one last part to that, is, I know this is a little redundant, those reviews always come right at the very end.
Right.
Which,
Exactly.
like, whether it's bulldozers the next
Yeah.
day, or even if they're not,
Right.
there's no review period for them to go and think through that, that's ever specified, where it's not like.
We
there's
should be
another
getting a
1 month
preliminary
cool down or
review.
something like
Yeah.
that, to go think
Right.
about that and maybe digest some of that into that.
Right.
So thank you, Delia, for raising the question. But no, it's a good question. It could be impactful, as I think you truly embrace the spirit of planning, to look years into the future, to look across departments, to look across, frankly, entities, and multi-million dollars that are expended in really significant projects in the municipality. So we'll take it offline, we'll have some more conversation, we'll bring it back here to the board that would ultimately, in close coordination with professionals and city staff and any number of other stakeholder groups, develop and exercise a new muscle, potentially. So this is good to kind of spark some ideas, and as ideas come to you, as you reflect further on it, you're certainly welcome to share it with me, but I'll keep the board abreast as we explore this moving forward. All right, so that concludes the public-facing discussion section of our agenda this evening. Before we formally move into closed session, for which the topic of focus will be the housing element in Fair Share Plan. For the record, I again would just remind anyone that may be interested or following along that at this time, and I'll have Mr. Warner speak briefly as to the rationale with which we're entering a closed session from a legal perspective, but this is an opportunity for the board to lay a foundational understanding of the responsibility, the role that it will play in the development of and ultimately approval of the housing element and Fair Share Plan as it relates to Summit. There will be opportunity for public input. We cannot make our decision without that active involvement, and we'll communicate to the public where and how those opportunities will present themselves. So I was the instigator to seek out this closed session, but Steve, maybe you can just relay for the record the legal rationale with which we may enter into this.
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yep, as the board knows, the Open Public Meetings Act requires all meetings to be open and public. However, there are 9 exceptions, one of which includes litigation for purposes of having closed sessions or executive sessions. By state statute, the Affordable Housing Round 4 Mount Laurel process is one that is commenced by declaratory judgment complaint. It's a declaratory judgment action. It's a lawsuit, is the process, is the mechanism. So all municipalities effectively were required, and we did file a declaratory judgment complaint along with submitting our binding resolution with our obligation for the 4th round. And the next process ultimately will be the adoption of a housing element fair share plan, along with implementation ordinances that will be coming in the summertime, that will also be submitted through the Affordable Housing Dispute Resolution Program within this declaratory judgment action. So as you can see, it's litigation. Litigation is one of the exceptions to the Open Public Meetings Act. In order for me to exercise my attorney role and give attorney-client privileged communications, and for everyone to be able to freely discuss same, notwithstanding a pending litigation. That said, as the chairman more than alluded to, and accurately, the Housing Element Fair Share Plan adoption process will be an open public process. There'll be a public hearing, at a minimum, a public hearing, prior to the adoption of the Housing Element Fair Share Plan to come in the next few months. So while this will be an executive session, the process will be, as required, open ultimately. So
Thank you, Mr. Warner.
hopefully that helps.
That was great, thorough as always. So procedurally, what we'll do is ask for a motion and a second, and then we'll vote to move into the closed session. In that, though, we are affirming as well, again, for the record, that no formal action will be taken by the board in that executive session. And when we exit, we're going to go home and go to bed. We're not going to come back and execute any action on the board there.
Other than to move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. That's correct. Okay. That's right. So with that, I would ask for a motion to move into executive session for the purpose of discussion of the housing element fair share plan.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Do we need a
And voice vote is fine.
voice vote? So all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Let's make sure Jay shuts off the
Yeah, he is.